We are getting into the flood, the good old flood. Good being a term that I wouldn't necessarily ascribe to it in every sense, but yes, there's goodness even in this. Hello, welcome. So we're going to Genesis chapter 6. Let's get ourselves there. You can already see up behind me that I'm going to be showing a video as well, which runs somewhere between 9-10 minutes, so I'm going to account for that. I will babble at you a bit, but I do want you to have the visual of seeing this. Those who were here last year saw an iteration of this. This one is the second deck, and I'll explain what that actually means in just a bit. But going to Genesis chapter 6, we know the last thing that we saw was that there's this man, Noah, who finds grace in the eyes of the Lord. And we read that in verse 8 of Genesis chapter 6. Now, we're going to go ahead and continue from verse 9 of Genesis 6 and just lay some of that foundation. It says, this is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Can I just say, it's not a really high bar to be perfect in Noah's generation, considering the fact that God's commentary, as we saw in verse 5, is that the wickedness in man's heart is continual all day, all night. It just is endless evil. It is all he contemplates. So Noah finding grace in the eyes of God and being called just and perfect in his generation might mean that he remembered to call his mom on the weekend. I don't know. Okay, but what I can tell you is that he is notable in his generation. Look, this is how I teach. Okay, he's notable in his generation. A very wicked and perverse one at that. Verse 10, and Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. We will talk about them some more next week when we pick up, on what happens with those 3 sons and how the lineage of those 3 sons is one of the most amazingly proven genealogies recognized by worldwide scholars. No one has ever written a genealogy as well put together and traceable as the one that we will see next week, coming from these 3 sons. Verse 11, the earth also was corrupt before God. The earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their ways on the earth. Are you seeing that repetition of corruption, corruption, corruption? It sounds familiar, I'm sure. Verse 13 of Genesis 6, and God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. So now he starts giving instructions. Make yourself an ark. Let me just pause there. That word ark is actually Egyptian in its root. And Moses, being the writer of the book of Genesis, employed that Egyptian root word. Basically, ark in this application means one of 2 things: floating object or big chest, like a chest you might store something in. We are not building a yacht. This is not meant for cruising. This has no sails. It is not meant, actually, to particularly move. It's got one sole purpose, and its sole purpose is in its description in the Egyptian phrase ark. It is meant to just be able to ride above water enough to not be submerged. It doesn't need directional capability. It doesn't need steering of any sort. It needs to not drown. That is literally what it has to do. One purpose. It says, make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Pause there again. What in the world is gopher wood? Let me just say that the term gopher wood is uncertain in its origin. What we do know is that gopher wood in this part of the Mesopotamian valley that we're talking about, where Noah's building, is likely referring, or maybe an archaic way of referring, to cypress trees. That was plentiful all throughout that plain. So it's very likely we're looking at old terminology for a tree that is now recognized as cypress. So if you go looking around and say, I'd like to plant a gopher wood tree in honor of Noah and the ark, you're not exactly going to find that. All right, continuing. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark. Cover it inside and outside with pitch or tar, something that waterproofs it, essentially. Make sure it's watertight inside and out. Make sure there are divided rooms in it. And this is how you shall make it. Here we go with archaic terminology. I'm going to break it down in our modern system. And this is how, verse 15, you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. There are two different forms of cubit. There is an Egyptian measurement, and there's a Spaniard measurement. It is very likely that the measurement we're looking at here is Egyptian. That would make more sense because regionally that would have been the accepted form of a cubit. If that's the case, then we're talking about an enormous structure that would have measured 450 feet by 75 feet by 45 feet. 3 levels. That means that each level would be just under 34,000 square feet, times 3. You start doing that math and you realize you are talking about a structure that not only is going to take a very long time for one man and his 3 boys to put together, but also is a structure that probably would not have paralleled anything else. Let me put it in even more modern terms outside of feet. You are talking about something that is at least a football field and a half. A football field and a half. Think about that. Anybody ever seen a football field? A traditional, like, NFL football field? Huge. That and a half. 1 floor, roughly. We know that if we believe the biblical account, then we understand this thing had to last. Does anybody know how long, or wants to take an estimate of how long Noah and his family and whatever animals came with him actually lived on that ark? Anybody know? How long did the voyage last from the moment the door is shut to the moment the door is open? It's not one we think about often, to be honest. It was actually 1 year and 17 days. Anybody want to be opted into a year and 17 days with a lot of animals? Roosters would not exist at the end of that year. They would not exist at the end of that year. Forget everything else. The second that thing starts crowing at about 5 o'clock in the morning, I want my life to end. Just let me drown with the rest. All right, here we go. It says, you shall make a window in verse 16 for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above and set the door of the ark in its side. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. Let me just, there's a lot of imagery, and a lot of it comes from sort of children nursery books and things of that nature that always show this monstrous boat and one tiny, tiny little window. Here's the one point I will make. It does say that there is a window. It says that it's finished from about a cubit above. It does not speak to the length of that window. Most people will tell you, functionally speaking, this is probably more of a wraparound of some sort, because there's a real functional thing here. Human beings need air source, as do animals. And if he's taking any kind of food and is strategic in the food that he's taking, he's likely taking things that he has built some sort of growing system for. He doesn't know how long this is going to be, and he knows he has to feed a whole lot of animals as well as his entire family. If there's any kind of growing system that exists there, even if it's simple planters, it needs a light source, it needs an actual air source. So any imagery you have in your head of this boat somehow having a tiny little space where all of this is coming through is probably not unlikely. If you're talking about something that has about 34,000 square feet on each floor, you need more air than that to be able to get to the belly of that. You need more passage because you are also talking about animals who are naturally, and humans, who are naturally going to have waste. And you need a way to get that off of the boat. So, when we think about it, think about the realism here when we're talking about this ark you have a lot of animals of some sort on there, clean and unclean. We're going to get into species and what we have recognized as the amount of species in this modern day. But if even only a fraction of that existed at that point, if only a fraction of that was discovered at that point, if only a fraction of that was available to him and came to that ark at that point, I mean, I don't know. In the mind of God, I'm not sure everything that God did because he doesn't get into very deep specifics about it. But it stands to reason, with the sheer size, we're talking about a big mamma jamma project, and that's a lot of yuck that has to be cleaned out. Functionally, it's not coming through a tiny little window that the giraffe is peeking out of in all the nursery books, okay? It's just not, that's not realistic. Continuing on. Latter part of 16, you shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. Decks there is another interesting term because floors, decks, when we think of decks of a ship, what do we think of? We think of an open area and things of that nature. The exact construction of this can be a bit mysterious. Maybe some of what I'll show you in modern day Turkey some geological discoveries, you might really enjoy this, that are from modern day Turkey might give us a little more insight. Continuing. Verse 17, and behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh which is in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you. Really the first time that we're seeing God use this term covenant. Now for those who were here last year, you know that in the book of Genesis, the word for covenant, which is used again for Abraham, it's a very specific word. It means to make a promise with a cut, the shedding of blood, skin in the game. It's a deep kind of word. It doesn't just mean, this is my pledge. This is a word that says, I make a cut. I shed blood on this. I put everything of myself into this. This is a covenant that's a sure thing. First one that's mentioned in the entire earth. My covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds after their kind, of animals after their kind, and of creeping thing of the earth after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. And you shall take for yourself of all food that is eaten, and you shall gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them. Verse 22, thus Noah did according to all that God commanded him. So he did. We find out that he does so in the face of adversity. And there are a lot of things sometimes that God calls us to build that others scoff at. I will tell you that there's no one in this room probably who has been in ministry for any time that has not endeavored to try and do something, a project, a ministry, a build of some sort for which you have received 100% participation or support. If you've been in ministry for a while, you know that. I know that. I received, my husband and I, next to no support for what we did on the Cape. Next to none. And we had a lot of scoffers who were like, why in the world would you go there? Why would you do that thing? But we were convinced of the voice in our lives. And I will say that one of the things about Noah that I find extraordinary is that Noah had made a decision within his life that he was committed to walking with God, having a relationship with God, and standing as one who was distinctly different in a generation that honestly had no regard for the things of God, for righteousness, for holiness, for even good decisions. These were callous, selfish, self-absorbed individuals who mostly just partied hard and did their thing. That's what they did. Already he was living a life in which he was essentially the enemy of the norm. And I would pose that as Christians, especially in this hour, which is supposed to be, and we'll look at this, so similar to Noah's hour, that we are facing a very unique circumstance that mimics back to what he did. We stand as something oddly different in a generation that's going with a totally unique flow and has no regard for righteousness, is doing its own thing, is led by its own conscience, my truth, everything is relative, I do me, you do you. These are the catchphrases of really your generation, more than anything, that's being ushered on all of the world. And here we are hearing a voice that's telling us to build a church. Here we are hearing a voice that's telling us to build a ministry. Here we are hearing a voice that's saying, write a book. Here we are hearing a voice that's saying, pray these prayers, intercede in this fashion. We are hearing a voice that others are absolutely going to scoff at. And the enormity of what we have to build at times seems so huge and so insurmountable with very little help. But I tell you the truth. There is a point in which God himself shuts the door and validates everything you've done. He validates it. God is good that way. When he knows that his people have heard him and have heeded him, he is the one who puts his final stamp on that. And the reality is, everyone knows the truth then. It says that there's going to be a point in which every knee is going to bow and every tongue is going to confess that Jesus is Lord. The thing that you and I already do. We confess his lordship. We confess his divinity. We confess in every day, in every way, in every decision, in every word, in the fact that we gather together and value his name and read his precious book and try and pattern our lives after the leading of the Spirit. We declare him and bend the knee every single day. We do that with a lot of people who are standing out of absolute obstinance, refusing to acknowledge. But there is a point when the door closes. Let's go to chapter 7. Then the Lord said to Noah, come into the ark, you and all your household, because I've seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. How extraordinary that after he builds, God says, now you can come in. You ever notice that? Because I've seen that you're righteous. It almost lends the question, if we were to fill that empty space, could we fill it with the fact that there was always a chance that Noah bowed out of the project? Was there always a chance that Noah could have taken his own free will back and just gone with the flow and given in to the scoffers and the mockers? Absolutely. At any point in this building project, he could have tapped out. Thank God for people who don't tap out. Thank God for people who literally grit their teeth, plant their feet, and keep moving. He knew and was convinced somewhere in his soul that the fate of humanity rested on his compliance, his obedience, his ability to stick with it, even in difficulty, even in scorn, even when there was no proof that any of this would happen. Yes? Literally, we see no other conversation God has with him. Thankfully, in the grace of God, he sometimes does. Moses is an example, right? Moses is an example of one who God had multiple conversations with. I'm really saying, go and do the thing. You can do the thing. Please do the thing. You know what I mean? But there is a grace in God. But this, I think, actually points more to the character of Noah, that it's unquestioning. Of course, it does say, as you remember when we read it last week, that Noah, and I'm gonna actually go back because I like this description. 1 second. Enoch walked with God, Noah. And he called his name Noah, saying, this one will comfort us. Okay, so chapter 5 of Genesis, a very interesting thing. Verse 29. You may or may not have noticed this before. I don't know if you've really seen this verse, that there's like a prophetical utterance of Lamech over his son, Noah. He says, Noah, see, he called his name Noah, saying, this one will comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands because of the ground which God has cursed. A very interesting thing. This is the guy that's going to bring comfort in the form of toiling with your hands. not knowing that this would be the son that would be engaged in an unbelievable building project, sitting right on cursed ground, right before the judgment of God falls. His father literally pronounced this over him. And if you look specifically at verse 8, but Noah, literally God is saying, I'm sorry I even created these people. I can't believe what they are. And it says that Noah actually finds grace. Grace there being the word for favor. Whatever Noah's situation was, we know this much. There are a lot of characters in the Bible who had to hear assurances over and over, and he was not one of them. I have no idea, as I stand here today. No, I lie. Yes, I do. I have every idea that I would need a lot more assurance than that. Honestly. I would need a lot of assurance, okay? I would need lightning striking the ground, and I would need like pearls falling from the heaven. I would need something, because I don't know if I could do that. What is rain? Exactly. What is rain? Oh man, can I just tell you, it's like, I want to get to that place. And I've mentioned her before, but I always think of Nona Freeman, who God actually told her when her time was coming, told her when she was going to pass away, gave her it was like a couple weeks notice, that was it, and told her within 2 weeks, you will be with me. That's it, it's over. You've done everything I've asked you to do. I'm taking you home in 2 weeks. To give her just enough time to close off her affairs, which she did. She wrote a letter. One of my friends got a letter in the mail. And there it was. It's Nona Freeman saying, the Lord has just told me this is the day that I'm going to, and she died on that very day. God told her. But the condition was this. God told her, you've done everything I've asked. So now, this is your reward. I'm taking you home. And she had no fear. None that she showed. She was completely calm and all right with her lot. I want to get to a place in my faith walk with God where God can look at me and say something once, and I'm so familiar with his voice that I don't have to sit there beating my head against the rocks, questioning and second-guessing and being anything less than confident. Man, I want to have the confidence of Noah, who gets the instructions, must have written those down, and just starts chopping trees. Until the day that God's like, you did it. I've watched you. You've done it this entire time. All these years, you just kept building after I told you to build. So now you, your family, everything that you love comes right in here. I got you. That's the story and testimony of Noah. Continuing on, going back to 7. Here's the directive. You shall take with you 7 each of every clean animal, a male and his female, 2 each of animals that are unclean, a male and his female, also 7 each of birds of the air, male and female, to keep the species alive on the face of all the earth. For after 7 more days I will cause it to rain on the earth. 40 days, 40 nights I will destroy from the face of the earth all living things that I've made. And Noah did according to all that the Lord commanded him. Again, it's just, you speak, I do. You speak, I do. You speak, I do. That's the nature of the relationship. I will tell you that this is, of course, a subject of much chatter in the world of archaeology. Of course. Because the question is, what happens to something that huge? I mean, we're talking about something the size of a football field and a half. How? What is the nature of being able to carry all this? I will give you some facts of our modern day. Now, understand that our modern day is able to seek out species that exist in most corners of the earth. We know this much, that there are about 59,000 species of vertebrate animals. This is going to include reptiles, amphibians, avians, so birds, mammals. That's going to be what it kind of comprises, marsupials. Okay, this is all going to fall under that kind of category. There's about 59,000. When it comes down to birds, okay, you're talking birds, you're looking at another at least 18,000. At least 19,000. If you're encompassing the entire earth. This is what we know of today. Now, I will tell you, I've seen Bible studies that at the time of their writing, there were only about 1 million discovered species. We're now at 2. There's always something new that's being discovered. But when I say 2 million, as opposed to 1 million, I'm including everything. Marine life, know that marine life alone accounts for the vast majority of species that exist on the planet. Much of what exists on the planet is actually in the water. You don't count that. It's going to survive with no problem if the entire earth is flooded. That's not the issue. God never gave the directive to take anything out of the sea and put it in tanks. He did say the things that creep on the earth, so to speak, the land animals, were something that were supposed to be preserved. I'm going to tell you this much. For this to even be possible at the time, they estimate, and there are some taxonomists who will sit there and say, well, at the time of Noah being on the earth, likely, there was probably about 17,000 known species at that time. After its kind is hard to know, because then we have to ask ourselves a very valuable question. Did they take the Pomeranian, the Doberman Pinscher, the Yorkie, I don't know. Or was it just a couple dogs made it? You know what I mean? We don't know. Okay? I will only say that there's terminology here that suggests of all the living things. A certain amount of clean came, a certain amount of unclean. There was enough for sacrifice, for food, and that's what it was. When you're talking about 34,000 square feet on 3 different decks, I will say this much. If I were to give an opinion, you're bringing things that are quite young. You are not bothering with things that are full size, and you're probably not bothering with things that are older. Because if you know that the propagation of the planet rides on your choices, you're probably going to pick things that are young, thriving, not too much trouble, and not knowing how long you're actually going to be on the boat, still have a chance of being alive once it's all over, to be able to replenish the planet. You're likely bringing smaller things to make your space as economical as possible. I am going to tell you right here and right now, I have no idea how this was accomplished. Outside of the plan, will, and ordinance of God, I know this much, that every major people group on planet Earth has a flood story. I know that the history of flood stories dates back thousands of years. I know that there are actual, and if you deep dive in this, educate yourself, find this out. You can just, the internet is one huge encyclopedia. Be wise about your sources. But know that you can actually find what they'll call lore or mythology even from previous generations that will say God's judgment fell on the earth and a massive flood happened. It was a huge extinction event. You will find it. And some of these cultures, downright pagan in origin, polytheistic in origin. They give no credit to anything in particular. Some will even say the gods did it. Some will say the great spirits of the deep did it. Mother Earth did it. They'll attribute it to what they know. And I'm not going to judge that. I'm simply going to say that it is for us even more overwhelming proof that it doesn't just generate from one religion. That the stories of a massive flood are something that have touched countless generations. It's literally a part of history. And there's also geological discoveries that support it. I will, if you're a note taker, jot some of these places down. England, France, Spain, Germany, Russia, China, Mexico, the Aztec Indians, most areas in the United States, especially desert areas. They all have reports, actual geological and archaeological evidence of massive groups of animals herding together and dying in high areas. There are bones to prove that something occurred in all of these areas straight across the world that caused animals that normally would not herd together. Animals that, to our knowledge now, are very much at odds with each other and would be considered predator and prey, herding together and dying simultaneously in areas, almost as if they were avoiding something, almost as if they were seeking safety. This is actual geological discovery. Let me tell you some more. In those same areas, they're finding marine life on the pinnacles of mountains. That means shellfish, fish themselves, mollusks, all of that, crustaceans that belong in the belly of the sea, clinging to barnacles and reefs at the bottom, were found on top. And there's no evidence of human intervention to have brought them there as if there was something that somebody caught and just brought up to have a meal. No, large groupings of them at the top of structures. How? There's a lot of evidence that seems to support this, but the biggest evidence that we could ever have is that boat, right? Here's what I will say. Mount Ararat does exist. It's not an archaic reference. It's not something where we have to try and figure out where was that, did that exist, was it called by something else? Oh, no. Mount Ararat is an actual spot. It's in Turkey, modern-day Turkey. Mount Ararat has a structure that is lodged to this day at about a 14,000-foot elevation. It, historically, has been viewed by a number of different kinds of people and has actually been penetrated in one of its walls and explored. I have a video that's going to run about 10 minutes that's going to show you one of those scientist groups actually going into it, having gained permission from the Turkish government. Now, they gained permission from the Turkish government under scientific masks, if you will. But the group, of course, was very curious about theological origin to disprove or prove whether this was the big biblical ark. From actual, there's a word I'm looking, satellite photography, it has very defined borders. It has been measured with an approximation. That approximation came within mere feet of what would have been the actual cubit system if it were Egyptian, measured by a person. Within mere feet. That has to account for shrinkage, change. It's very cold up there. This thing is mostly encrusted in ice, and we can thank goodness that such a discovery, whatever it may be, is encrusted in ice, because that has actually preserved it. I will tell you, shavings were taken from the inside of it to attempt to figure out what kind of wood. It is, in fact, cypress. Furthermore, they were able to find, frozen again because of the terrain, which perfectly preserves a lot of things, they were able to find actual animal excrement within it. They were able to find hay that was perfectly preserved in some clumps still existing on some of the decks. Some of it was impenetrable. I want to forewarn you of that, because when you're going in something that could be of this kind of age, thousands of years at this point, you're talking about a very delicate matter. There's only so much exploration that could have actually been done. What they do know is they see evidence of it being hand-hewn, because there are variations in the way that the wood is cut. It uses old toggle systems for nailing and things of that nature, and it has evidence, because of the blackened spaces in between some of the boarding, of tar or pitch. This is an unusual thing. Now, I will tell you, the Turkish government is overwhelmingly Islamic. And because of that, there are extreme limits on how many Americans they're going to allow in to actually take a look at this. I'll tell you just a little bit about some of the facts before I play this, because I don't want to run out of time. I can tell you that about 300 years before Christ, okay, so we know Christ, time of Christ is let's say, estimating it, just putting it round numbers, 2,000 years ago, right? And some change, we know. But probably about 200 to 300 years before Christ, which would have been about 2,200 years after the flood, okay, so something that's already 2,200 years old, there was a Chaldean priest. His name was Berosus, Berosis. And Berosus wrote 300 years before Christ about having viewed the Ark of Noah upon the Mount of Ararat himself at that time. Intriguing. Okay. Marco Polo, famous world explorer, he visited Ararat en route to China, and in his own account said he saw a massive structure that appeared to be an ark resting upon Ararat. There have been engineers and scientists who have confirmed roughly 50 tons of timber, largely intact and shaped like a huge ship, is clearly preserved inside of a glacier on the mountainside of Ararat. That doesn't just disappear. You don't have something of that nature just disappear. We're not conducting massive bonfires on something like that. If that is going to lodge itself in a mountain, here's the other thing. Because it's almost 50 tons that they can see, let me just tell you another fact for certain. Based on whatever age it seems to be and the accounts of it going back in history thousands of years, I can tell you this much. It, number one, is not something modern because it hasn't moved from that spot. If it were modern, I'm telling you, there's no way that we have any kind of helicopter or pulley system that can get 50 tons of wood into a shape and lodge it in the spot that it is awkwardly lodged at a 14,000-foot elevation to that extent. I'm sorry, but you're not building almost 100,000 square foot structure that high. We don't have that capability. And those conveniences would not have existed in any way at the time in which this structure was first discovered as being there. This is significant. This is significant. And that kind of thing doesn't just disappear. A bulldozer can't bring it up there. A helicopter can't bring it up there. Just doesn't happen like that. It is not modern. So I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to play this for you so that you can see the account. This one is called Second Deck. And I think you'll find this very interesting. These are the explorers who were able to take some time and actually visit this structure with Islamic approval from the government. So, let me also put that on the screen for those on Facebook so they can see it.
Last year, I made $403,919 using e-farming. If you've been trying to make money from home, or if you're interested in firing your boss,
exists. It's very intriguing that such a thing exists, and essentially is a form of petrified wood. It's a wooden structure, partially caved in, but has not been able to be moved over the sands of time. It's compelling. It's quite compelling. It's compelling because there have been multiple explorers. There was a Korean group that I saw go into that same area and be able to go through a very similar opening within it. How they got permission is anyone's guess, but there was a Korean group that went in there, and they were the ones who were actually able to shave off some samples and do a little testing to see what they were looking at. They were the ones who were able to find that there was evidence of animals having been in this thing, in this structure. Now, of course, there are those who would say, well, a structure that's on a mountainside would get penetrated by animals, and there's a certain measure of that would be true. Of course, over time, that would happen. This could become a fantastic nesting grounds, especially when it's newer. But we still have to deal with the fact that there are things that have age within them, and that age is unique. And what do you do with such a structure that somehow lands there that has no business being that high up on a mountain, even if it is within a certain plane? These are all interesting things. I'm going to end us for tonight. Next week we'll pick up with Days of Noah, a comparison between now, the coming of Christ, and we'll move on to his children and genealogy from there, and how the world kind of dispersed and how people groups came to be. We'll talk a little bit about that next week. Any questions, comments, anything like that? Yeah, it's well, and you know what? I do wonder over the years, did anybody, like, I will say this, can I just say a personal opinion? If I'm rebuilding the world, if I were Noah, I probably would have broken some of that down to begin to fashion houses. It's already kind of perfect for that, you know what I mean? I'm surprised that any portion of it might still exist. It's actually surprising to me. But it is lodged so high that, again, what is he going to do? He's already coming down. It's clear in the scripture. Read the rest of the story. He's already coming down from a mountain himself, trying to figure out how to get down from a high place. How he even managed that is a modern wonder. How he did such a thing, let alone trying to carry any portion of that down. It's impossible. Yeah. Oh, God. How many pieces of the Berlin Wall exist? Yeah. Yeah. No, we are not allowed in there. Yeah, we are not allowed in there, but we know this much. It is a structure, it is a proven structure, it's an archaeological wonder, and it is not much talked about. But it exists. Its existence is documented. It's been documented for thousands of years. It's always been there. It's always been there. But I will say this much, the jig is up anyway, because in reality, this world that we're living in, this generation we're in, is not going to find reasons to prove God. Neither the existence of God nor the validity of the Bible. That's just not what's up. That's not what's up here. So whatever this may be, whatever your thoughts about it may be, I know this much. Our faith is going to have to be built exactly on what faith is. The substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. I don't know about you, but I probably am going to make my grave not seeing this structure. I'm probably not. I'm not going to be able to lay my hands on it, and you surely aren't going to see me shimmying down on a rope into it, okay? But I know this much. I do believe the biblical accounts. I believe in the inerrancy of the Word of God. I believe these things have happened, and I believe there's enough evidence in human history that is unbiased that shows something occurred. A great flood occurred. Geological evidence of animals where they shouldn't be, animals herding, extinction events, something that happened that was cataclysmic and all at once. I know that these things have happened because we have proof that these things have happened. We have great flood stories straight across the globe. We have situations all over the place that seem to point that there was an event in history that shaped out in this manner, and we have some sort of satellite and geological evidence, archaeological evidence, whatever you want to classify it under, it's actually all of the above, that such a structure still sits in the very place that the Bible accounts it would have rested. Is that it? I leave that to you. But I know this much. That book doesn't lie. That book doesn't lie. Whether it tells us the whole story in every detail, well, that's the mind and prerogative of God. But that book doesn't lie. So, we're stopping. Would anybody like to pray? Unless there's other comments. I'm late today. Oops. We good?